Topic here is World War II begins in Europe and Asia. I want to direct you to this particular file here because we see that file being used. Here we have a map of Europe as well as a map that includes, or images that include some terms, a couple of maps here. The kind of first thing I want you to do for this now is analyze the sheets. Directions are here, and we want to keep track of the German and the Japanese aggression. So you probably want to organize your notes like this: Japan, Italy, Germany. You just want to keep track of how this war begins from a European point of view and a Japanese point of view. So the first thing I want you to recognize here are some of the terms. Reference to the broken glass, which is Kristallnacht. In this particular image here, you see some of the features of an authoritarian state. It talks about controls over media. It talks about one-party dictatorship and so on. Notice how they have some symbols there that represent authoritarian states, like the swastika, the hammer and sickle. So this section right here is pretty much about Europe. Italy and Germany seem to be the focus there. These maps here are what I'm concerned with at this particular point because this looks at Japan. So the first thing you want to think about is, why is Japan getting involved in this particular conflict? And for them, this is a war for superiority and dominance in Asia. So here we see Japan, and if you look closely at the map, you see a bunch of resources that are here that do not seem to be a part of what Japan has. So from the Japanese point of view, their goal seems to be about resources and as well as, once again, the superiority issue that they're trying to be the dominant player throughout Asia. So it seems to be a pretty good alliance. The Germans and Italians will control Europe, and then the Japanese will control Asia. That seems to be the overall long-term goal. When we look at the map, we see this reference here, the RON, which is a reference to the rape of Nanking. The Japanese military will go into the capital, and they will slaughter 80,000 Chinese civilians, women, children. If you do a Google search, you'll see some images for the rape of Nanking. We will watch a brief documentary about this atrocity. So the Japanese army then proceeds south, and they move into what becomes known as Indochina. Now, Indochina is shaded brown on the image that I have. You can barely see it, but this is a reference to territory that had been since the 1800s controlled by France. So when Japan moves its military south into Indochina, that is going to lead to tension with France, and we already know that France is allied with the British, and the Japanese are going to be allied with the Germans as well as the Italians over here. So you start to see some of the alliances take place, and that's the significance of that particular map that's there. So again, your notes, for Japan, you could put, resources, superiority, racial ambition. Italy and Germany are allied. We really didn't say much about Germany just yet. We'll focus on them later on. So here you see the three main players, for Japan, Italy, and Germany that we are concerned with for the most part here. And the sides during World War II that I've already addressed. We have, looking at this particular key, the Axis and the Allied powers. And this map here seems to be after the 30s, because the United States is part of the alliance and they're going to come in at a later date after Pearl Harbor. Okay, so we see some of the images here. Yes, I zoomed in on them, so I want you to focus again that Japan, is in a quest to obtain resources in order for their military to thrive and to go on with their global political ambition. They definitely are going to have to do something about their inadequate resources, which is why they're moving into this particular region. Now, just another thought here. World War II definitely seems to be about race on some level. We already know about the German racial views, but for the Japanese, these individuals, there seems to be a feeling that the European nations in the West view the Japanese and the people of Asia as inferior. And I can't help but think of Langdon Down had looked at people with Down syndrome and made a pretty basic assumption about the physical features with people with Down syndrome in connection to people from Asia with focus on the epicanthic fold. And so just some of the language about the Japanese that were referred to as the Mongolian race, which was an offensive term going into the 1800s when some of this language and some of these, I hesitate to call them theories, were developed. But here I did a search for some of Downey's research, and here he's talking about the Mongolian or the yellow race. He says that the Mongolian blood is a depraved blood. So pretty much from the Japanese point of view, they're looking at the way the West is looking at them racially. And I can't help but think that the Japanese are not feeling that the West are viewing them on any sort of racial, equal level. Why is this important? Because a documentary that we're going to watch is going to address some of these racial issues. I'm just trying to show you some of that particular research. Once we're done watching the video that's going to address the rape in Nanking, you'll start to see some similarities between Germany's ideology and Japan. One of the things in the documentary, they talk about how Japan was very similar to Nazi Germany with their nationalistic views, and they felt that the West, primarily the United States, were too individualistic. All right, so let's move on here. That documentary, they're going to talk about Japan moving into Manchuria, moving into China, committing the rape of Nanking atrocity. And they do have a scene in the film that looks at the League of Nations, and you see the Japanese ambassador waving his fist, and he's very upset. The League of Nations response, which is why I put the League of Nations political cartoon here. When we look at this political cartoon, what you notice is the League, you have the muzzle on this very nasty dog with these teeth, and the League of Nations really doesn't do anything. It's like, Japan commits this war crime and crime against humanity, and it kind of goes unpunished. The League is in a position to do pretty much nothing. Remember, the British and the French are trying to avoid war because they're utilizing appeasement as their foreign policy. And if you did not remember, the United States never joined the League of Nations, which is what this political cartoon is trying to show you here. So that's a quick analysis on that thing. We really didn't get into Italy, so let's say a little bit about Italy. I'm not going to focus so much on Italy during the conflict. We'll primarily focus on Germany and Japan. What we want to take note of here for Italy, though, is that Italy, I don't know if you recall the Berlin Conference when the European powers had carved up Africa, but during that political power grab, Italy had fought a war with Ethiopia. Italy had lost that particular conflict, and that loss in Ethiopia, where the Africans for the first time had fought against a European occupier. This is a stain on the Italian military, on their prestige, and this seems to be a pretty big deal to have that prestige. And Italy has something to prove. It's going to prove its dominance by deciding that they are going to go back into the region. So Italy creates the first fascist state, and they decide that they are going to invade Ethiopia. And there's some long-term bad blood between those two. And Italy is going to heavily bomb this place. Once again, the League of Nations will do nothing. When we're looking at your chart, I just want to point out that German aggression seems to be last. Japan is going about its invasion of Japan and China. So we can put here Japan versus China, rape in Nanking. Italy is bombing Ethiopia, and Germany, their aggression is going to be last. The League of Nations doesn't do anything but condemn the acts by both Italy and Japan. And again, that's probably a result of some of the politics at that league on a global scale. So let's talk a little bit about Germany here. That's where that particular map comes in. So when we're looking at Germany, we have some issues with the Treaty of Versailles. We know that Germany was upset with the Treaty of Versailles, primarily led to the economic collapse. And part of the reason why the Germans voted for the Nazi Party. So when we're looking at this map here, we see these territories: Rhineland, Austria, Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia. These are the territories that Germany first takes, moves into. So what you would probably want to do, just kind of identify these items. So we have the Rhineland. I don't know if you remember, but that was discussed early on with the Franco-Prussian War. France and Germany have been fighting about with that. We have Czechoslovakia, we have Austria here, Poland, Sudetenland, and then we have Russia that is over there. So let's go back to the other map. I'm looking at this map here, which is pretty much showing you the German advance with the arrows. But these are the territories that you are responsible. This is how Germany gets involved in the war. The first place that they go into is the Rhineland. And remember, the Rhineland was, a territory that, was a result of the Franco-Prussian War. France had given that up to Germany in the 1800s. During World War I or after World War I, Germany had to give this back, which is why we did the card exchange. So the Rhineland is one of the first places that Hitler sends his military. So we'll put France versus Germany there. Now, if Hitler has his military and he sends his military in the Rhineland, then that would tell us that before he moves into the Rhineland, that he had already violated the Treaty of Versailles. So he has his military, and with that military, he moves into the Rhineland. Remember, the Allies, the British and the French, are using appeasement, so they let him get away with this, and then they let him get away with this. And again, with that policy of appeasement, you have to know the person you're dealing with. And Hitler's probably looking at this thinking, well, they let me build up a military. They let me use that military. I'm not paying those reparations. Let me see how much I can push this issue. Next place, he is going to take over Austria. Now, Austria is a little different because Austria is where actually Hitler is from. So Hitler is going to claim that there actually is some, similarities between the Germans and the Austrians, and the Austrians and the Germans have a common history. And before you know it, you're going to see Austrians celebrating. When we watch the documentary, you'll see the Austrians celebrating. So this isn't really a takeover. He doesn't need the military like he needs it with the Rhineland. The Austrians seem to be accepting of the German takeover. However, keep in mind that was worded in the Treaty of Versailles that Germany and Austria were not allowed to have any sort of connection. Next part, we're going to move into the Sudetenland. We're going to move into Czechoslovakia, and the documentary will show some of the people here as well celebrating. Now, just a side note, here's Germany, the more territory Germany acquires, that means they're acquiring that country's Jewish population, their asocial population, their Romani population, their homosexual population, the people with Down syndrome, the people that are malformed, the people with schizophrenia, the people with any sort of medical conditions. So I'm just trying to point out that as Hitler and the Germans advance, their numbers are increasing, which is part of the reason why you're going to need the final solution, because Hitler is going to have to figure out a way. This is where it gets weird. And I don't know the numbers here, I'm making this up. But let's say all of these numbers of these people, Germany has 1 million. When they go into the Rhineland, Austria, Sudetenland, their numbers are going to go up. They might end up with 20 million, and they're going to have to figure out a way, if they're committed to killing these individuals or sterilizing, to really figure out a way to, sadly kill all of these people. All right, so the start of the war is Poland. You see Poland here. Prior to Germany going into Poland, they brokered a deal with Russia. Russia and Germany were going to split Poland up, and this was going to be a temporary alliance between Russia and Germany. And before you know it, the German army goes into Poland, and at that particular point, the British and the French are like, okay, we've had enough. And that is usually considered the start of World War II, when Poland is invaded by Germany. Eventually, Germany would then move its military into Russia, which is right here, which means he stabs Stalin. Russia, his former temporary ally, is going to invade Russia. I don't think Germany would have much love for Russia because, and using Nazi ideology, they're communists. Communism stems from Karl Marx. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, and Karl Marx happened to be Jewish. These are people that believe in something called the Protocols of Zion. And if you are committed to killing the Jewish people, you would have to go into Russia. So at that particular point, going into Poland is Germany versus Britain and France. However, now that he has moved into Poland and then moved into Russian territory, it is now going to be Russia. Where's the United States in all of this? Yeah, we're not getting involved, and that is not going to happen until Pearl Harbor, which will then bring the United States into this conflict. Okay, let's move on to the next political cartoon showing the marriage with the temporary alliance between Stalin and Hitler. Here you go. I don't know what to say about this. It definitely seems homophobic, but I'm going to move on. Why German conquering matters. I kind of already addressed this. The Jews in Europe, looking at this particular map, again, if you're committed to exterminating the Jewish population from Europe, Germany can probably easily do that. They don't have that many, but when they go into Poland, they go into Czechoslovakia, their Jewish numbers are going up, which means at some point they're going to have to figure out a solution. And that solution has a name because we have already talked about that the German army with the Einsatzgruppen, the German army has a military force called the Einsatzgruppen that is following the German army as it advances through Europe. And their job is to round up Jewish people and shoot these people on the spot. And eventually this is going to be problematic for those individuals, and they're going to have to implement what becomes known as the final solution. Here you see some images for Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. This timeline is trying to show you the progression of German Jews. First, they're citizens. The Nuremberg laws take that away, and then before you know it, World War II begins. They acquire more Jews. They're trying to shoot the Jews, put the Jews in ghettos and concentration camps. So I'm kind of showing you the progression of what happens to the Jewish people. One of the other items, another issue of sadness, during the 30s and even going into the 40s, people trying to escape if they're on the list of extermination. In this case, the Jewish people fleeing. This is the tale of the St. Louis. Here you see the St. Louis ship that is trying to gain access. It's Jewish people fleeing Germany, and they are denied entrance. Eventually, they find themselves back in Europe, and many of these individuals would perish at the hands of the Nazis. This particular map is showing how many people, how many Jewish refugees, countries were willing to accept. That's kind of what this one here is showing you. I can't really make out the numbers, but it looks like the U.S. has 100,000, Cuba 4,500, Dominican Republic. So these numbers are showing you how many people that country took in as people were trying to flee, the Nazi plan here. League of Nations not really doing much, and that's it for the European causes for World War II.